The closure tape was already tied across Laurel Fork Spur when we got there. That should have been impossible. At 6:12 that morning, the order to close that trail was still unsigned on my supervisor's desk. No maintenance crew had been sent. No storm damage assessment had been filed. No dispatcher had cleared anyone to block public access. But the tape was there. Orange Forest Service closure tape, rain shining on the plastic, stretched from a black birch to the old brown trail sign like somebody had known 18 hours early that nobody should go past it. Ruth Marlowe saw it first. She had worked those Appalachian trails longer than I had been alive, and she was not the kind of woman who startled at weather, bear sign, deadfall, or blood on leaves. She had cleared trails after ice storms. She had carried injured hikers out of hollows in the dark. She had once walked 3 miles on a broken ankle because she said sitting down in cold rain was how people made themselves into paperwork. But when Ruth saw that tape, she stopped. She didn't curse. She didn't step closer. She didn't ask who put it there. She just reached into her rain jacket, unwrapped one of those peppermint candies she always carried, put it in her mouth, and stared past the tape into the trees like she had just recognized a face she hoped was dead. I radioed dispatch. "Any crew assigned to Laurel Fork Spur this morning?" Janine came back clear. "Negative." "Any closure order approved?" A pause. "Negative. Still pending." Ruth finally spoke without looking at me. "Cut it down." I took out my pocket knife and stepped toward the tape. Then she said, "Don't untie it." I looked back at her. Rain was running off the brim of her hat. Her eyes were still on the trail beyond the sign. "Cut it," she said, "and put the pieces in your pack." I asked her why. She said, "Because if it comes back, we need to know if it's the same one." That was the first rule Ruth gave me that morning. By sunset, she would give me 2 more. And by the next day, when the official report said Laurel Fork Spur had been closed for storm damage, there would be no mention of the tape, the boot prints, the dog that refused the trail, the radio call, or the voice that came up from below the ridge using a missing man's name wrong. Before I go any further, and I don't say this for effect, if you're listening to this late at night, or with the rain outside, or from somewhere near the mountains, pause it. Check your windows, then come back. I'll wait. I have carried that day for 9 years. I still carry it in small ways. I cut tape differently now. I don't whistle while I work. I don't step over an orange closure line unless I know who tied it and why. And when I see a trail sign leaning even a little toward the woods, I stop walking before I know I have stopped. Most of the public thinks our work is about trees, trash, hikers, and weather. A lot of it is. You spend enough years in a national forest and you learn the rhythm of ordinary trouble. A culvert plugs. A family underestimates a climb. A dog slips its leash. Somebody parks where they shouldn't. Somebody ignores a closure because a sign feels less real than their vacation plan. You learn how to speak gently to frightened people and firmly to reckless ones. You learn that most incidents are not mysteries. They are bad timing, bad shoes, bad judgment, or a storm arriving earlier than forecast. That is why real mysteries stand out. Not because they are loud, because they refuse to behave like the other problems. I was 42 when Laurel Fork happened. I had been with the Forest Service for 16 years by then, most of it in and around the Monongahela, with enough time in other Appalachian districts to know the difference between folklore and field sense. People outside these mountains think those two things are separate. They are not. Not always. Sometimes an old warning is just a superstition that survived because it sounded good beside a wood stove. Sometimes it is a safety rule wearing a story's coat because nobody had better language when the thing first happened. I believed that before Laurel Fork. I believe it more now. Laurel Fork Spur was not a popular trail. It ran off a larger loop west of a ridge locals called Mercy Backbone, dropped through mixed hardwood, crossed 2 feeder creeks, then climbed toward an old service road that hadn't been maintained since the early 80s. The official maps called the drainage Laurel Fork. Older topo sheets used another name, Juniper Hollow, though there weren't many junipers left there by my time. Ruth called it that place below Mercy, and rarely anything else. The rain had started on a Monday and stayed through Wednesday night. By Thursday morning, we were getting reports of washouts all over the district. Nothing unusual. May rain in those mountains can soften the earth fast, especially where old logging cuts still run under leaf litter like scars under skin. My supervisor, Carl Hensley, had asked me to take Ruth up Laurel Fork because she knew that trail better than anyone on payroll, even though she was technically a volunteer, and reminded us of that whenever paperwork got stupid. I liked Ruth. A lot of us did. She had grown up near Parsons, married a lineman, buried him, raised 2 daughters, and then given most of her spare time to keeping trails clear, because she said sitting still made grief louder. She could identify trees by bark and rain, tell you whether a drainage would hold after a storm by the color of the water, and shame a younger man into carrying a crosscut saw properly without raising her voice. She had a way of making the forest feel like a place with rules you could learn if you were patient. That morning after I cut the tape, she looked at the loose ends on the ground and said, "Put the pieces in your pack." I asked why. She said, "Because if it comes back, we'll want to know if it's the same one." I looked at her, then really looked. Ruth wiped rain from her cheek with the back of her wrist. "You heard me." I put the cut tape in an evidence bag because that made more sense to me than putting it loose in my pack, and because making something procedural is how you keep your thoughts from running too far ahead. I labeled it with the time, location, weather, and my initials. Ruth watched me do it. She said, "You always write like the paper is going to save you." I said, "Sometimes it does." She looked down the trail. "Sometimes it teaches other people what to leave out." I didn't answer that. I had heard old rangers say similar things after bad incidents, usually over coffee after the families had gone home and the reports had been filed. It was not cynicism exactly. It was fatigue. Every official report is a clean hallway built through a messy house. It gets you from one end to the other, but it does not show every room. We started down Laurel Fork at 6:31. The first half mile was normal. Wet, slick, but normal. There were fresh limb drops from the storm, one small slide where the bank had slumped against the trail, and a shallow wash where water had cut across the tread. Ruth marked trouble spots with pink flagging. I took photos in GPS points. The air smelled like wet leaves and crushed fern. Somewhere above us, a wood thrush called once and then stopped, not in a dramatic way, just in the way birds stop when they are finished. At 6:49, Ruth paused beside a sugar maple with a long lightning scar down one side. I thought she had found another trail issue. Instead, she leaned closer to the trunk, not touching it, and said, "That's new." There was a strip of orange closure tape tied around the backside of the tree. Not across the trail, not visible from the direction we had come, just wrapped once around the trunk at about chest height, pulled tight, with the loose end tucked under itself. The black lettering faced inward toward the woods. Trail closed. The letters looked darker in the rain. I photographed it, logged it, cut it off. Ruth said nothing. We kept walking. At 7:06, we found the first print. It was on the downslope edge of the trail where water had softened the mud under a bank of rhododendron. A boot print, adult size, deep heel, clear tread. The direction of travel was uphill, away from the creek and toward the ridge. It was fresh enough that rainwater hadn't softened the edges. I crouched beside it. Ruth stayed standing. I said, "Could be a hiker before the storm." She said, "No." I looked up. She nodded toward the print. "Mud would have slumped. Edges are too clean." She was right. I knew she was right before she said it. The print had been made after the last hard rain, which meant sometime that morning or late the previous night. Nobody had been authorized on that trail except us. That did not mean nobody had been there. Unauthorized hikers cross closures all the time, and there had not been a closure yet, officially or otherwise. But the print felt wrong because it appeared alone. No matching print ahead of it, no print behind it. Just one boot mark facing uphill, pressed deep as if somebody had stepped out of the woods onto the trail, placed their weight carefully, and then vanished without taking another step. I expanded the search area around it. Ruth waited. I found nothing. No scuff, no broken fern, No second impression under the leaves. I took photos from 3 angles and marked the location. Ruth said, "Leave it." I almost laughed because what else was I going to do? But her tone stopped me. She said, "Don't step in it." I wasn't planning to. That's not what I mean. I looked at her again. She didn't explain. That was Ruth's second rule. Do not untie tape you did not place. Do not step into a print that has no pair. At the time, I treated both rules as symptoms of Ruth's old mountain caution, the kind of private logic people build after years in difficult terrain. I respected it without believing in it. That distinction matters. A lot of bad decisions are made in the space between respect and belief. We continued for another 40 minutes. The trail narrowed as it dropped toward the first feeder creek. Fog gathered in the low places, not thick enough to hide the trail, but enough to soften distance. My radio crackled occasionally against my shoulder. Dispatch checked in every 30 minutes. Ruth answered my observations with nods and brief comments. The rain let up, then returned as a mist that clung to sleeves and eyelashes. At the creek crossing, we found another piece of closure tape. This one was underwater. It was wrapped around a stone in the middle of the creek, the orange plastic moving with the current like something alive. Ruth saw it before I did. She put out her hand and stopped me from stepping down off the bank. "Don't touch that one," she said. I was tired of rules by then. I said, "Ruth, if someone is out here messing with trail markers, we need to document it." She looked at me, and for the first time that morning, I saw something like anger in her face. Not fear, anger. "You can document it from here." So I did. I photographed the tape in the creek from the bank. I zoomed in as much as the little field camera allowed. Rain dotted the lens. The letters were visible in fragments as the current turned the plastic. Closed, closed, closed. That was when my radio keyed itself. I don't know another way to describe it. The speaker clicked. The small red transmit light flashed once, and for about 3 seconds I heard open air. No voice, no static, just the sound of rain and running water, the same creek sound I was hearing with my ears, but flattened through radio compression. Then it stopped. I took the radio off my vest and checked the buttons. Nothing was stuck. I checked the channel, correct channel, battery fine, antenna tight. Ruth had turned away from the creek. She was looking uphill toward the direction we had come from. I asked if she had heard the radio. She nodded. I asked if she had ever had that happen in that hollow. She said, "Not on a Thursday." It was such a strange answer that I almost missed what it implied. Not never, not here, not like that, not on a Thursday. I said, "What happens on Thursdays?" Ruth looked tired suddenly, older than she had looked 10 minutes earlier. "Mostly nothing," she said. "That's why I didn't like it." Before I could ask what that meant, dispatch called my unit number. Janine said Carl wanted us to return to the station. I asked why. She said there had been a missing person report connected to Laurel Fork. Ruth closed her eyes. I remember that more clearly than almost anything from that morning. Ruth standing in the rain beside that creek, eyes closed, not surprised, not frightened, just disappointed in the way a person looks when something they had hoped would not happen has happened exactly on time. The missing man was named Andrew Pike. He was 34, from Morgantown, a school counselor according to his wife, though he had grown up in Tucker County and knew the area better than most visitors. He had gone out the previous afternoon to scout a route for a weekend backpacking trip with 2 friends. He had texted his wife at 4:18 p.m. that he was turning back because of rain. He did not come home. His truck had been found at the lower Laurel Fork access at 9:22 that morning by a county deputy. The deputy had seen orange closure tape tied across the access gate. That gate was not ours. That access was not scheduled for inspection. And nobody from our office had placed tape there either. By the time Ruth and I made it back to the trailhead, the first search team was assembling in the rain. 2 county deputies, 3 volunteers, 1 SAR coordinator named Miles Decker, and a dog team from Randolph County. The dog was a black and tan hound named Hattie, handled by a woman named Lena Sorrell. I had worked with Lena before. She was calm, practical, and not given to performance. Her left hand had a permanent crookedness to it, from a winter rescue where a rope burned through her glove. Hattie trusted her completely. Andrew Pike's wife, Claire, sat in the back of an ambulance with a blanket around her shoulders, though she was not injured. She had driven to the access after the deputy called and had refused to go anywhere else. She was maybe 30, with short dark hair plastered flat by rain, and a face that looked composed only because it had not yet caught up to what was happening. I spoke with her for 6 minutes. I know because I logged the interview start and end times. She told me Andrew was cautious. She told me he hated being late. She told me he had a habit of sending photos from trail junctions because he liked proving to her that paper maps still mattered. The last photo she had received showed the Laurel Fork sign at the upper trailhead. Behind the sign, very faint in the fog, there was orange tape. I asked her to show me again. She handed me the phone. The timestamp on the photo was 4:03 p.m. the previous day. The tape in the photo crossed the trail in the same place Ruth and I had found it at 6:12 that morning. 18 hours before the closure order. 14 hours before anyone knew Andrew was missing. Ruth was standing behind me when I looked at the photo. I did not turn around, but I heard the peppermint wrapper in her pocket crackle. Claire asked me if that was bad. I told her we were taking everything seriously. That is a phrase professionals use when the truth has too many edges. We started the search at 11:20. The rain had slackened, but the fog remained. The plan was simple enough. Lena and Hattie would work from Andrew's truck at the lower access, while one hasty team moved up trail from the top. Ruth and I would return to the section where we had found the first strange tape in boot print, partly because I wanted to document it properly now that we had an active missing person, and partly because Ruth would have gone whether anyone assigned her or not. Carl called me before we deployed. He told me to be careful. I told him we always were. He said, "No, I mean careful with what you put on the radio." That was not like Carl. Carl was a rule man, not rigid, but clean. He believed in documentation. He believed in proper channels. He believed bad information killed people faster than weather. If he was telling me to be careful with radio traffic, it meant something had already reached him that he did not want reaching everybody else. I asked him what he meant. There was a silence. Then he said, "If you find more tape, photograph it. Don't speculate." "More tape?" "Photograph it," he said. "Then call me direct." He hung up before I could ask another question. We went back in. This time the trail felt different. Not visibly. That was the problem. The same wet rhododendron, same runoff, same dark trunks and slick leaves and low gray light. Nothing had transformed. Nothing announced itself. But I found myself watching the trees the way you watch people in a room after a bad argument, aware that everyone is standing where they were before, but the air has changed. Ruth walked ahead of me. She did not look back. At the sugar maple where we had found the hidden tape, there was nothing. At the mud bank where the single boot print had been, there were now two prints. The original print was still there, softened slightly by rain but recognizable. Beside it, about 8 inches to the left, was another boot print. Same size, same tread, same direction. It had not been there that morning. I know it had not been there. I had photographed that mud from every angle. I had paced a perimeter around it. I had stood close enough to see ants moving in the leaf litter near the bank. That second print had appeared sometime between 7:06 and 12:03. Ruth looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "He's not walking." I said, "Andrew?" She shook her head. "The trail." I did not understand her. She pointed to the two prints. "It's counting." I felt irritated again, because fear often comes first as irritation when you are trained to stay useful. I wanted Ruth to speak plainly. I wanted her to tell me what she knew or admit she did not know anything. I wanted the world to divide cleanly into evidence and superstition. Instead, she said, "My mother said this used to happen with fence gaps." What used to happen? Ruth took a breath through her nose. Something would mark a place before the cows got through. Folks thought a neighbor was doing it. Then one year a boy went missing near a gap that had been tied shut with feed string the night before. After that, people stopped untying knots they hadn't made. It was the most she had said about it all day. I asked who the boy was. She said, "No one living remembers." That was not an answer. It was probably the truest answer she had. I photographed the second print, logged it, called Carl direct. He picked up on the first ring. I told him what we had found. He said, "Any sign of Andrew?" "No." "Any sign someone else is in there?" I looked at the two prints. No clear sign. He exhaled softly. Then he said, "Pull back to the crossing and hold." I asked why. "Because Lena just called in from the lower access. Hattie won't take the trail." I looked at Ruth. She had heard enough through the radio to understand. Hattie was a good dog, not as experienced as some, but steady. Lena had worked enough recovery cases with her to know the difference between confusion and refusal. We found Lena at the lower access 30 minutes later. Hattie was sitting in the wet gravel near the gate, ears low, tail wrapped around her feet. She was not whining. She was not agitated. She looked like a dog waiting for people to stop asking the wrong question. Lena stood beside her with the lead slack in one hand. She said, "She has scent." I asked, "Ann?" "She won't cross the tape line." The tape line at the gate had been cut by the deputy that morning. The pieces were in a plastic bag on the hood of his cruiser, but Hattie behaved as if the tape were still there. Lena walked her toward the open gate. Hattie stood, followed for 3 steps, then stopped at an invisible boundary and sat down again. No pulling, no fear, refusal. Claire Pike watched from the ambulance. She had both hands around a paper cup of coffee that nobody had seen her drink from. I watched Hattie refuse the gate 3 times. Then Lena looked at me and said, "I'm not forcing her." Nobody argued. That may sound strange if you have not worked around search dogs, but dogs are instruments in this work, and like any instrument, you learn when the reading is bad and when the instrument is telling you something you do not want to hear. A dog refusing terrain is information. You can dislike it. You can question it. You do not throw it away. Miles Decker wanted to push a ground team in without the dog. He was not careless. He just had a missing man, a wet forest, and daylight draining away. Every hour mattered. I knew that. We all did. Ruth stood beside me in the gravel. She said very softly, "Don't send 4. I turned my head. "What?" "Don't send 4 people in." "Why 4? She looked toward the gate. "Because it likes even numbers." I almost told her to stop. I almost said her caution was becoming interference. Then my radio clicked, and Janine from dispatch asked for an update. And under her voice, barely audible, another voice said something that sounded like 4 names being read from very far away. Miles heard it. Lena heard it. Ruth heard it. Claire Pike stood up from the ambulance bench. She said, "That was Andrew." Nobody moved. Janine asked me to repeat my last transmission. I told her to stand by. Claire stepped down from the ambulance. The blanket slipped from her shoulders and landed in the wet gravel. A deputy moved toward her, but she held up one hand and he stopped. She looked at the woods beyond the gate. Then she said not loudly, "Andrew hates being called Andy." I had not heard the words clearly, only the cadence, only the faint list shape of it under the dispatch channel. But Claire had heard enough to know that whoever or whatever had spoken did not know what a wife knew. That small detail changed the whole search. Not officially. Officially, we suspended dog deployment due to animal behavior concerns and weather deterioration. Officially, ground teams were instructed to hold at access points pending revised strategy. Officially, radio interference was noted and channel discipline was reinforced. Unofficially, nobody wanted to enter Laurel Fork through a gate that a good dog would not cross while a voice used the wrong name for a missing man. By 3:30 p.m., the rain had returned harder. Fog lowered into the valley. The county wanted to keep searching. Miles wanted to send 2 experienced volunteers along the old service road from the ridge side. Carl told him no. They argued by phone for 10 minutes. I heard only Carl's side because he had stepped away from the trucks, but not far enough. He said, "I am not putting people in that drainage blind." Then he said, "Because I've got 2 dogs refusing access from 2 separate approaches." Then he said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "You can put my name on it." That ended the argument. We held the search until morning. I expected Claire to fight us. Most families would have. She did not. She sat back down in the ambulance, wrapped the blanket around herself again, and looked at the open gate as rain ran down the metal bars. I walked over to her before we cleared the scene for the evening. I told her we would resume at first light. She nodded. Then she said, "His grandmother told him not to answer from hollows." I waited. Claire watched the gate. She was from around here. She used to say if somebody calls you from below the trail, you keep walking. Doesn't matter if it's your own name. Doesn't matter if it sounds hurt. I asked if Andrew believed that. She gave a small, tired smile. Andrew believed every old story was just a bad thing that happened often enough for people to remember it wrong. I did not know what to say to that, because I believed something close to it myself. That evening I went back to the ranger station and sat with Carl in his office while the rain darkened the windows. His office smelled like old paper, coffee grounds, and the damp wool of his coat hanging behind the door. He had the Laurel Fork file open on his desk. Beside it sat a manila folder I had never seen before, older than our current filing system, edges soft from handling. I asked what it was. Carl closed it before answering. Background. On Laurel Fork? On that part of the district. I wanted to ask to see it. I didn't. Instead, I told him about Ruth's rules, the tape, the prints, the dogs, the radio voice. Carl listened without interrupting. That was how I knew he was taking it seriously. Carl interrupted ordinary confusion. He corrected bad assumptions. He asked for times, names, exact wording. But that night he let me talk. When I finished, he rubbed one hand over his mouth. Then he said, "My first district ranger told me there were places you route around when the woods start doing paperwork." I almost laughed. Carl did not. He said, "I thought he was joking for 3 years." What changed? He looked at the closed folder. A trail register on Dry Fork filled itself with names during a closure in 1987. The room felt smaller. Carl continued, not looking at me. 3 names. All 3 belonged to men who had gone missing in that drainage between 1939 and 1962. We found one living hiker that time. He said he followed voices uphill because they knew his mother's hymn. I said, "Why isn't that in the district history?" Carl looked at me then. "It is, just not in the version we hand to seasonal staff." That was the first time I understood there were 2 histories in our office. One with maps, orders, budgets, fire records, trail projects, and public language. Another made of closed folders, quiet reroutes, pencil notes, and older employees saying things that sounded like superstition until the day you needed them. I slept badly that night. Around 2:15 a.m., my phone buzzed on my bedside table. I woke before the second vibration because fieldwork does that to your nervous system. The caller ID showed the ranger station. It was Janine. Her voice was flat in a way I had never heard. She said, "I got a call on the emergency line." I sat up. "From who?" "That's the problem." I heard paper moving on her end. The caller identified himself as Andrew Pike. I turned on the lamp. "What did he say?" "He said he was at the upper trailhead. He said he could see the tape. He said not to cut it again." My mouth went dry. "Did you trace it?" "No caller ID. It came through the old line." The old line was a hardwired emergency phone system that should not have been active anymore except as backup through the station's switchboard. We tested it quarterly. Nobody used it. I asked if she recorded the call. "Yes." "Play it for me." There was a pause. Then Janine said, "I'd rather not do that over the phone." That told me enough. I dressed and drove to the station through rain so heavy the road disappeared beyond my headlights. At that hour, the mountains were only shapes behind the weather. Houses sat dark along the county road. The few porch lights I passed looked small and temporary. Janine was alone in the dispatch when I arrived, wearing a gray sweater over her uniform shirt, hair pinned up badly, eyes red from lack of sleep. She had printed the call log and placed it on the counter as if paper could create distance. The call had come in at 2:07 a.m. Duration, 43 seconds. Source, Legacy Emergency Line. She played it once. I wish I could tell you the voice was obviously Andrew's or obviously not. That would have made something easier. It had the right age, the right male register, the right exhaustion. But the pacing was wrong. Each word sat slightly apart from the next, like someone reading language from stones. This is Andrew Pike. Static. I am at the upper trailhead. Rain sound. I can see the tape. Long pause. Tell them not to cut it again. Then quieter, almost too quiet for the recorder. It lets the wrong ones through. The line clicked dead. Janine did not look at me when the recording ended. I asked if Claire had been contacted. She shook her head quickly. No, I wasn't putting that on her at 2 in the morning. That was the right decision. I asked if she had told Carl. He's on his way. I listened to the recording twice more. The second time I noticed something under the voice. Not static, not rain. A steady wet tapping, too close to the receiver, like water dripping from leaves onto plastic. I had heard that sound that morning from the closure tape at the trailhead. Carl arrived at 2:41. He listened once. Then he told Janine to make 2 backup copies and mark the file restricted pending active search. He did not look surprised. That frightened me more than if he had. At dawn, we resumed. We did not use the lower gate. We did not use the upper entrance. Carl made the decision to approach from the south ridge along an old fire road that had not been drivable in years, but could be walked safely. It would take longer. It would avoid both tape lines. It would also bring us above the drainage, which meant if Andrew was alive and moving, we might catch sign where he came out. Ruth came despite not being assigned. Carl saw her in the parking lot and said, "No volunteers today." Ruth said, "Then put me on payroll for the morning." Carl stared at her. Ruth stared back. He handed her a radio. We moved out at 7:18. There were 6 of us, Carl, Ruth, Miles Decker, Lena without Hattie, a county deputy named Orr, and me. We carried standard packs, extra batteries, rain gear, trauma kits, and 2 ropes we hoped not to need. The weather had improved only slightly. Fog hung in strips across the ridgeline. The old road climbed through poplar and maple, then narrowed where saplings had taken it back. For the first hour, nothing happened. I remember feeling almost embarrassed by my fear. That is common too. You walk through ordinary woods after a strange night, and the daylight makes you feel foolish. Wet branches brush your sleeves. Your boots slide in mud. Somebody coughs. Somebody adjusts a pack strap. The world insists on being practical. Then Ruth stopped. We all stopped with her. Ahead of us, tied between 2 young maples, was orange closure tape. None of us spoke. Carl walked forward slowly. He did not cross it. He looked at the knot. Then he looked at me. It was the same square knot. The black letters faced us. Trail closed. Miles said, "This is not possible." Ruth said, "Possible isn't the line." She reached into her pocket and unwrapped a peppermint. Carl told everyone to hold position. He photographed the tape. I photographed it. Deputy Orr photographed it. We documented like people trying to build a wall out of evidence. Then Carl took out his knife. Ruth said, "Don't." He paused. She said, "That one was put there for us." Carl looked at the tape. I could see the fight in him. Every official instinct he had wanted to cut unauthorized closure tape in an active search area. Every older part of him, the part trained by men who had learned not to laugh at paperwork in the woods, told him to leave it alone. He left it. We rerouted downslope. That decision likely saved us, though I cannot prove it. 30 minutes later, we found Andrew's pack. It was sitting upright on a mossy log about 50 yards below the old road, under a stand of hemlock, not dropped, not torn, not soaked inside despite the rain. Sitting upright, straps tucked neatly along the sides. Claire had told us Andrew was organized. The pack looked too organized. Miles approached it first, photographed, called out Andrew's name, then opened the main compartment after gloving up. Inside were his rain shell, a water filter, a small first aid kit, 2 protein bars, a headlamp, and a folded paper map in a plastic sleeve. The map had been marked in pencil. Andrew had drawn his planned route. He had also circled Laurel Fork Spur in a shaky line and written one word beside it: listening. Claire had not mentioned that. Maybe she hadn't seen the map before he left. Maybe Andrew wrote it after he entered the forest. Maybe somebody else did. I don't know. There are too many maybes in this work. Carl looked at the word for a long time. Then he said, "Bag it." That was when we heard the whistle. 3 notes, not loud, not close. It came from below us, somewhere in the drainage. 3 clear notes rising at the end like someone calling a dog. Lena closed her eyes. Ruth put her hand on my sleeve. Nobody answered. The whistle came again. 3 notes. Deputy Orr whispered, "Is that him?" Carl said, "No one responds." His voice was calm enough that we obeyed before fear had time to ask questions. The whistle came a 3rd time. Then a voice called from below. "Claire?" That was all. One name. Andrew's wife's name. Miles took 1 step forward before Lena grabbed his pack strap. He stopped, breathing hard through his nose. The voice called again. "Claire!" It sounded male. It sounded tired. It sounded far enough away that distance should have torn it apart, but the name arrived whole, clear, and intimate. Carl keyed his radio and called dispatch. He asked whether Claire Pike was at the staging area. Janine answered that Claire was there. Carl asked if anyone had told her name over open radio in the last hour. Janine said no. The voice called a 3rd time. This time it sounded closer. Ruth whispered. It heard her from him. I looked at her. She did not explain. She did not need to. Carl made the hardest decision of the search. He ordered us to withdraw uphill. Miles argued. Only once. He said Andrew could be below us. Carl said Andrew could be below us, and something else could be using what Andrew knew. Miles looked at the drainage, then at Andrew's pack, then at Lena's hand, still gripping his strap. He stopped arguing. We moved uphill slowly, facing down the slope as much as terrain allowed. The whistle did not follow us. The voice did not call again. But as we climbed, I began to notice tape, not tied across our path, not blocking us, wrapped around trees at the edge of sight. Small orange flashes in the fog, one behind a beech, one around a fallen branch, one looped through the ribs of an old deer skeleton half buried in leaves. Each piece faced inward, toward the drainage, as if the entire hollow had been marked closed from the inside. When we reached the old road, Carl called a full suspension of field operations in Laurel Fork until weather cleared and additional resources arrived. The county protested. Claire Pike collapsed when she saw us return without Andrew. I remember Lena sitting beside her in the gravel, not saying anything, just placing one hand on Claire's back while rainwater ran off both their jackets. That afternoon, the closure order was approved. Officially, Laurel Fork Spur closed due to storm damage, unstable tread, and search operations. Unofficially, nobody who had been on the South Ridge believed that wording covered even half of what had happened. Andrew Pike came out at 5:26 the next morning. Not from Laurel Fork, from Mercy Church Road, nearly 4 miles east, barefoot, hypothermic, carrying one piece of orange closure tape tied around his left wrist. A mail carrier found him standing beside the road before sunrise. He was conscious but not responsive. His feet were cut badly enough that the EMTs expected a blood trail, but no blood trail was found on the road, the shoulder, or the first 100 yards of woods behind him. He had Andrew's ID in his pocket. He had mud up to his knees. He had no pack, no boots, no jacket. When the deputy asked his name, Andrew answered correctly. When the deputy asked where he had been, Andrew said, "Past the line." When the deputy asked what line, Andrew looked at the tape on his wrist and began to cry without making a sound. I saw him at the hospital later that morning. Claire was with him. She would not leave his side, not even when doctors asked questions. Andrew looked smaller than he had in the photos. Not physically smaller exactly, but reduced in the way people look after being alone with something they cannot bring back into language. Carl asked him only necessary questions. Andrew remembered turning back because of rain. He remembered seeing orange tape across the trail and thinking we must have closed it after he passed. He remembered trying to go around it because his truck was below, and he thought the tape must be for uphill traffic. He remembered hearing somebody whistle 3 notes behind him. He did not whistle back. He said that several times. I didn't whistle back, like it was the one fact he needed us to understand. He remembered finding more tape, some across the trail, some around trees, some tied so low he had to step over it. He remembered thinking if he followed the side where the letters faced, he would get out. Then he corrected himself and said he thought that because someone told him. Carl asked who. Andrew closed his eyes. Sounded like Claire. Claire began to shake. Andrew opened his eyes quickly and reached for her hand. It wasn't, he said. I knew it wasn't. It said Andy. Claire covered her mouth. He said he kept walking without answering. He said the woods changed directions around him. He said he found his own boot prints going places he had not been yet. He said once, near dawn, he saw a section of trail ahead with tape across it, and behind the tape were 4 people in yellow rain gear standing perfectly still with their backs to him. He did not know if they were real. He said one of them had my radio voice. That is the part I did not put in my notes. There is a version of truth that belongs in hospital records, and there is a version that stays in the room like breath on glass until everyone silently agrees not to touch it. Andrew recovered physically. Mostly. He went home after 5 days. Claire took him somewhere near Charleston for a while, then out of state. I heard later they moved to Ohio. I hope that is true. I hope they found a flat place where trails do not fold back on themselves, and rain on leaves sounds like rain on leaves. The official report closed the case as lost hiker exposure complicated by severe weather and disorientation. The closure tape was attributed to unauthorized third-party activity. The radio call was logged as probable line fault. The dog refusal was not mentioned. Andrew's statement about the tape line was summarized as confusion. His map was returned to the family, but the word listening does not appear in the evidence inventory. Ruth never worked Laurel Fork again. Neither did I. The trail remained officially closed for 2 seasons due to washout repairs we never completed because the damage was never as bad as the order said. After that, it disappeared quietly from newer visitor maps. Not erased, just omitted. There is a difference. Erasing invites questions. Omission lets absence become normal. Carl retired the next winter. At his farewell, people told funny stories about budget fights and bear incidents and the time he fell through rotten decking at a picnic shelter and kept giving instructions from underneath it. Ruth brought a cake. Janine cried a little. Carl shook hands with everybody and accepted a framed map of the district, as if maps had not betrayed him more than once. Before he left, he gave me the old manila folder. He said, "Don't keep it in the file room." I asked where I should keep it. He said, "Somewhere you'll remember to look before you need it." Inside were copies of reports from 1936, 1954, 1987, 1999, and one undated handwritten account from a trail crew foreman whose name I couldn't read. Different drainages, different seasons, same details repeating in changed clothes, tape before closure, knots nobody claimed, people hearing names from below the trail, dogs refusing boundaries, trail registers with names written before arrivals, warnings not to answer. Not every incident ended badly. That may be the most unsettling part. Sometimes people came out fine except for what they would no longer do. One man stopped crossing footbridges. One woman refused to sleep in rooms with open windows. One trail worker left the service and became a mail carrier in a town with no woods inside the limits. A county deputy wrote in 1954 that the missing boy kept asking who had tied the woods shut. I read the folder 3 times. Then I put it in a metal lockbox in my garage under old tax records and a broken camp stove. I still work here, not in the same role. I moved into more administrative work after Carl left, though I still go out when needed. Younger rangers think I am cautious. Some probably think I am superstitious. I am all right with that. Superstition is what people call a procedure before they understand the incident that created it. I teach seasonal staff how to document unauthorized closures. I teach them to photograph before cutting. I teach them to note not type, tape orientation, weather, and whether lettering faces toward or away from the trail. I tell them not to joke about voices and hollows, because jokes make people answer too quickly. I tell them that if a dog refuses clean terrain, the dog has given them information and they should have the humility to receive it. Most of them think I am being thorough. A few understand I am being merciful. Ruth died 3 years ago. Heart failure, quiet, at home according to her daughters. I went to the service. The church was small and full, and somebody had placed peppermint candies in a glass bowl near the guest book. Afterward, her older daughter handed me a folded note Ruth had left in an envelope with my name on it. It said only one sentence. If the tape is tied low, it is not meant for you. I have never found out what that means. I hope I never do. Laurel Fork is not on the public map anymore. You can still find it if you know old roads and older habits. Some hikers do. The internet has made secrets thinner than they used to be. Every few years, someone posts about an abandoned spur near Mercy Backbone, asks if anyone knows why it's not maintained, says there are weird bits of orange plastic in the trees down there sometimes. I never comment, but I watch those posts until they disappear. The last time I went near the upper trailhead was in late October, 2 years after Ruth passed. I wasn't on duty. That matters. I had driven out after a storm to clear my head because grief makes old places louder, and I found myself on the road before I admitted where I was going. The gate was rusted, but standing. The Laurel Fork sign had been removed. 2 bolt holes remained in the post like blank eyes. Leaves covered the entrance. The woods beyond looked ordinary, wet, brown, quiet in the mild way of late fall. There was no tape. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes. Then from somewhere below the trail, a voice called my name. Not loudly, not dramatically, just my first name, spoken in Ruth's voice. I did not answer. I did not step closer. I did not say goodbye. I got back in my truck, drove home, and put Carl's folder on my kitchen table. That night I read every report again and realized something I had missed. In none of them did the first person to answer a voice come back unchanged. In none of them did a person who stayed quiet get followed beyond the road, except sometimes by dreams and sometimes by habits. That is the mercy, I think. Not safety, a boundary, a line you can honor if you are lucky enough to be warned. I keep orange tape in the back of my truck now. All of us do. We use it for ordinary work most days. Culverts, slides, hazard trees, damaged bridges. It is just plastic. Cheap, bright, practical. But every time I tear a strip loose, I look at the lettering. I make sure it faces the public. I make sure the knot is mine. And if I ever come back to a trailhead and find tape already tied there, wet with rain, letters facing into the trees, I leave it exactly where it is. Then I call dispatch from the road. Not from the trail, never from below it.